Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. This is Andy Roach from the Center for Leadership and Disability at Georgia State University. And I'm pleased to be able to welcome you to the third of our three pre-Academy webinars for the AUCD Leadership Academy. This one is entitled Courage and Renewal, Resources for Authentic Leadership. And we're very fortunate today to have Matthew Wesley Williams with us. Matthew is Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Forum for Theological Exploration, a national leadership incubator that cultivates wise, faithful, and courageous leaders who make a difference in the world through faith communities and academic institutions. During his 13 years with FTE, Matthew has led initiatives in the recruitment and development of young leaders and rising scholars of color, and capacity building and leadership development with academic institutions and faith-rooted organizations. Prior to coming to FTE, Matthew served at the National Black Leadership Initiative on Cancer at Morehouse School of Medicine. There, he coordinated the research, advocacy, and educational initiatives of community cancer coalitions in 10 states. He also has served as a pastor at the First African Presbyterian Church in Lithonia, Georgia. He holds a master's degree from the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta and bachelor's degrees in both psychology and philosophy and religion from Florida A&M University. Originally from Chicago, Matthew resides in the Atlanta metropolitan area with his wife Alexis and his children Zuri and Sage. Matthew is a trained facilitator within the Global Center for Courage and Renewal and Art of Hosting Communities. He is a thriving cancer survivor, committed to utilizing his academic, activist, and pastoral background in the spirit of Ella Baker, who observed, "I have always thought that what is needed is the development of people who are interested not in being leaders as much as in developing leadership in others." He is co-authoring a book on leadership and change to be published this year with Chalice Press entitled The Care Effect, Living and Leading Change for Good. So in a second, I'm going to hand over the sort of presentation to Matthew. I just want to remind you that if you have questions during the webinar, to please use the question box at the side of your screen, and we'll be monitoring those. And there are a couple places in the webinar presentation where we'll stop and take or essentially respond to any questions. So please feel free to use that mechanism to ask for clarification or any additional information. So with no further ado, I'll hand it over to Matthew.
Thank you, Andy. And again, welcome to all of you who have joined us for this webinar. I'm grateful to be here and looking forward to being with you in a few weeks. So this webinar is about Courage and Renewal, Resources for Authentic Leadership. And for the next hour, what we're going to do is explore the approach to convening and facilitation that will shape much of the experience that we'll have together. So this notion of courage and renewal, you'll hear more about this in detail in a moment, but it really draws on the fact that the design of the AUCD Leadership Academy is based on the idea that one of the most important interventions that change-making leaders can make in systems and organizations is really with themselves, that a leader's self-awareness and a leader's ability to lead with authenticity and integrity is directly tied to their ability to lead change in larger systems and movements. And so we want to help to provide some resources that can help to foster that kind of authenticity and integrity in leadership that's made possible by that self-awareness. So in today's webinar, we're going to cover a few things and that pertain directly to the process that we'll undergo together, that we'll experience together in the Leadership Academy in a couple weeks. And so today's webinar will include the following. First, you can see in red lettering, we will name the learning objectives for the Leadership Academy. Second, as you see in green lettering, we'll learn about the Center for Courage and Renewal and the Circles of Trust approach, again, that shapes and will shape much of our time together. And then we also, in conjunction with the Circles of Trust approach, we'll be utilizing a couple of additional methodologies that we want to highlight as well. So first is Art of Hosting, which you'll hear more about, and then Leadership Self-Reflection Ally Groups. That's in purple, Art of Hosting in orange. And then finally, we want to review the Arc of the Week to kind of orient you to the time, how we'll be spending our time during that week, and talk a little bit about next steps, and that's you see in blue. So here are the learning objectives. By the end of this 6-day experience, starting the afternoon and evening of Sunday, going through Friday, these are the things that we hope to do together. One, we want to gain insight into the history of disability and civil rights movements. Secondly, we want to locate ourselves and our organizations within that disability and civil rights, within the disability and civil rights movements. Then we want to explore strategies for working within and across systems using the collective impact framework. And then finally, gain insight into the role of self-awareness and reflection in our practice as leaders and leadership practice. So these 4 objectives really you'll see reflected in the whole course of our time together. And there'll be opportunities for us to see how each of these objectives really feeds the other and operate in a kind of a symbiotic relationship to each other. So first, let's talk about the Center for Courage and Renewal and the Circles of Trust approach. First, a word about the Center for Courage and Renewal, which is the organization through which I was trained as a facilitator, and that out of which we get the Circles of Trust approach. That is the approach that will ground much of our time together. The Center for Courage and Renewal was founded in 1997. It was first called the Center for Teacher Formation. It had a focus on teachers and on education. And the 3 folks that you see pictured there are Parker Palmer, Marcy Jackson, and Rick Jackson. They were the founders of the Center for Teacher Formation, which eventually became the Center for Courage and Renewal. Their concern at the time was really to help sustain teachers in the hard work of education. As many of you know, teachers, especially K through 12, are often in stressed and broken systems in which they lose their reason for doing what they're doing and their sense of calling and passion and purpose. So the question was, how do we help these professionals reconnect with their sense of calling and purpose and renew their passion for teaching to the whole student and not just teaching to test and those kinds of things that they might be pushed to do by those kinds of educational systems. Many of these questions were lifted and explored in Parker Palmer's landmark book, The Courage to Teach. And much of the work of the center is heavily based on the writings and the work of Parker Palmer. So the center, over time, expanded its focus to work with other professions and other leadership roles, which include healthcare and medicine, ministry, business, and other forms of community leadership. But across all of those professions and other kinds of leadership roles in the broader community, the aim of the work of the Center for Courage and Renewal through its 200 plus facilitators worldwide is to create a more just, compassionate, and healthy world by nurturing personal and professional integrity and nurturing the courage to act on that personal and professional integrity. And so in doing that, what courage work, as we call it, does is it builds our leadership capacity to lead and to act with courage and pursuit of our convictions and our true callings. It helps us to develop greater trustworthy relationships through which we can do the kind of work in the world to which we feel drawn. It helps us to cultivate practices to sustain ourselves as leaders and inspire others for the kind of long haul work that's required in serving professions and in social change work. And it also builds leadership capacities for folks to begin to work together and to transform the institutions and the systems in which they serve. So the Center for Courage and Renewal does this work through a signature approach to leadership development and personal discernment called Circles of Trust. Parker Palmer's book, A Hidden Wholeness, The Journey to an Undivided Life, lays out in detail both the theory and the practice of this approach. But the Circles of Trust is an approach that fosters alignment between who you are and what you do. Parker has this notion that he works with called an undivided life being the aim for which Circles of Trust are focused. He talks about a divided life as a life in which our words and our actions conceal or contradict truths that we hold dear inwardly. And an undivided life is a way of being in the world in which our inner convictions, our values, our commitments, they are congruent with our work and our choices in the world. So for leaders in social justice movements and cause-driven organizations, you know, this alignment couldn't be more valuable because in this work and public work of other sorts, this work rests on deep inner convictions that require inner clarity and inner courage in order to be able to articulate those values and to act on those values. And that's what this approach is designed to cultivate. What this also supports, what Circles of Trust also support through its practices and disciplines is also a practice that organizational theorist Peter Senge calls the discipline of mental models. And that is that what he talks about is that in organizations that strive to be learning organizations that can look at the environments in which they're working that are typically in flux and in change processes themselves, organizational leaders need the capacity to build their organizations or their movements ability to learn, right? So what mental models does is it's the process of lifting to conscious awareness the assumptions that are driving our activity. And when we lift those assumptions to conscious awareness, they help us to discern whether the kind of schemas that we have mentally about the way the world works, the way change works, whether those schemas actually map accurately to the reality that we're facing. And lifting those assumptions to conscious awareness give us an opportunity to make choices about what kind of schema, what kind of mental map we want to be operating from, and make choices about whether we want to be driven by outdated models of the world and of our activity in the world, or whether we can update them and drive those models toward the kind of change that we hope to see. Another way another organizational theorist put it this way, Peter Senge's partner in much of his work is an economist by the name of Otto Scharmer at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who's famous for his model of social change called Theory U. And in talking to one of the companies that he used as kind of a living laboratory through which to study social change and organizational change, Hanover Insurance Company, whose CEO at the time was Bill O'Brien, during an interview where he was really kind of seeking to gain insight about change from this kind of corporate context. He gained this nugget from Bill O'Brien, and O'Brien says that in change efforts, he says the success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. And so that underscores the fact that if one is not aware and self-reflective about the sources out of which their actions, even their reflexive actions, emerge, then one is likely to be reproducing the very outcomes that they seek to change, because they haven't reflected deeply on the ways in which the current state of things have shaped their consciousness and shaped their creativity at deep and unexamined levels. And so raising those unexamined assumptions to conscious awareness allows us, again, to choose whether we want to drive change or be driven by the mental models that underlie the status quo. And what Circles of Trust does to help us do that kind of deep reflective work is it leverages a discipline of principles and practices that enable shared exploration of core identity, formative experiences, and deeply held commitments. So we talk about them in Circles of Trust work as principles and practices that serve as the kind of understructure for Circles of Trust, and will serve as the understructure for much of our time together. So let's talk about those principles. There are 7 interdependent principles that really are to be understood as a whole, not as individual principles that can be plucked out of context. So the first is the idea that every individual has what Parker Palmer calls an inner teacher. And folks from different backgrounds and traditions use different words for that thing that Parker talks about as an inner teacher. Some talk about it in terms of a moral compass. Some talk about it in terms of conscience. Others call it inner light or soul. But everyone has this inner world, and out of which they're able to draw inspiration, instruction, direction, and guidance. And so this approach is designed to create space for people to access that inner world and that inner teacher to gain more capacity for their leadership. The second principle is that in order to take that journey inward, for leaders who will be reflective practitioners, you need a balance between solitude and community. And so that inner work requires folks to have that time alone, but also to have a community of support with whom they can dialogue. And when heard by others who are listening deeply to them, they can actually be heard into deeper speech into deeper speech and into deeper articulation of the assumptions and most times the unspoken ideas and values and assumptions that are driving us. What's also important is that this is not work that can be coerced, right? So that if one is to take that inward journey and to do that work exploring in solitude, that kind of guidance that can emerge from their moral compass, conscience, or inner teacher, then that work must be invitational. It's not something you can force folks to do, but it's something that we invite participants to take up. That invitational work moves in cycles, and our lives move in cycles. And so part of our work also pays close attention to the fact that these principles and practices are not one and done sorts of things, but our lives move in cycles like the season, and it requires that we pay attention to different cycles to where we are at a particular moment. And so when we come together in a couple weeks, we won't be asking you to write your life story or reflect on your what life will be like 20 years from now, but really to pay attention to where you are in the moment, how you came to be there, and how your leadership is being formed even now. So everyone has an inner teacher. Inner work requires solitude and community. Inner work must be invitational. Our lives move in cycle like the seasons. But then, given the fact that we are humans and live in human communities, we are automatically caught up in worlds of paradox, where most times we are living in either or experiences, where, as many of you know, in leadership situations, easy and simple answers many times are the wrong ones, right? Niels Bohr, a Danish physicist who's given credit for being a kind of progenitor of the field of quantum theory, says that the opposite of a fact is falsehood, but the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth. And so we often find ourselves, especially when we're working with people and with complex systems that we're trying to develop some change in, we find ourselves needing to hold complexity that doesn't often resolve itself easily. And so appreciating paradox is an important piece of this. And then finally, I'll take these last two together, that we are whole people who tend to live in environments that would cause us to fragment pieces of ourselves, that would typically cause communities to fragment pieces of themselves. And so part of this is an invitation to pay attention to the whole of yourself, recognizing that as leaders in whatever sectors we will be in, all of who we are affects all of the rest of who we are, right? And so this integrity that we hope to foster is dependent on us really seeing ourselves as whole people and paying attention to the fact that you can't touch one part of the self without really impacting the other part of ourselves. And that's true both for individuals, for movements, for organizations, and for systems. So those are the general 7 principles that underlie the Circles of Trust approach. Here are the practices. So the first and one of the most important practices has to do with how we co-create the space that we convene in together. So we create spaces that are open and hospitable, but we try to bring in resources that are enriching and that are charged, such that the spaces are charged with expectancy around what may be possible as a result of our coming together. The second one is really in service to this idea that everyone has an inner teacher, right? And so for one to pay attention to one's own inner teacher, in some ways we have to create space in which outer teachers are held at bay. So we commit to no fixing, no advising, no saving or correcting one another. But in the real sense, we hold in community the solitude and protect the solitude of those who are around us, so that they can take the journey that they need to take in service to their own self-awareness and discernment about their next steps. Another supportive practice to inviting folks to take that inward journey, to explore and discern their own leadership needs and tasks, and even to clarify their own challenges, is to ask open and honest questions. And now, this is one we tend to hang out on a little bit and to provide a little more coaching on, because this invites us to use questions in a way that's somewhat countercultural. Most of us are used to offering questions that are leading questions, or questions that we tend to already know the answer to. But open and honest questions are questions that where a litmus test for an open, honest question is, it's a question to which you really don't know the answer, or a question to which you don't have a right answer already in tow for the person that you're asking it to. So, as an example, if you're hearing someone's story or experience, asking them, have you ever thought about seeing a therapist? That would not be an honest and open question. But an honest and open question might be, so how was that experience for you, right? And that gives a person the kind of spaciousness that they need to kind of delve a bit deeper into a conversation with their own selves. Then we explore the intersection between universal stories and personal stories, right? So you'll have an opportunity during our time together to share stories of your experience in leadership, of the experiences that have shaped your leadership identity and values. And those personal stories, if we delve deep enough, really speak to the universalities of human experience. And so we use these practices to explore those intersections. We also use multiple modes of reflection. We know we all don't learn differently. We all don't perceive or hear the same way. So we use multiple modes of reflection so that everyone can find their place and their opportunity to do the kind of reflection they need to do. And then finally, because sometimes we are even surprised by what comes up and what we share. And sometimes the stories that we need to reflect on and share in these experiences are tender stories. We hold deep confidentiality so that we know these stories don't belong to us. They belong to the one who lived them and who shared them. And so we honor confidentiality as a core practice. So those are the principles and practices. And here are some of the key concepts that we use in the practice. So there are touchstones, which are simply guidelines that we operate by, that really ground how we will show up with and to one another. There's also a reflective rhythm in the process, such that we'll be providing opportunities for you to do personal reflection work. There'll be opportunities for small group reflection and dialogue, as well as large group reflection and harvesting. And you'll see that reflective rhythm happening throughout the course of each day. I've mentioned honest and open questions, again, which is a key concept in the core practice. Deep listening is another key practice that makes the reflective process more potent and enables people, when they feel like they're being heard deeply, enables them to hear themselves actually more deeply. And as you saw the quote on the earlier page, to hear one another into deeper speech is a kind of aim of what we mean by deep listening, so that when you're paying attention to someone, you're giving them your undivided attention. Third things are these tools that we use to help to either enter some exploration or exit an exploration. And third things can be things like poems, music, videos that kind of stir our imagination and our reflection together around a particular theme. And so we use those third things to help us together enter a particular theme with common language or with a common framework. And then finally, we're aware that it is very, very difficult to do this kind of reflective work and self-awareness work if we're moving too fast, if our schedule is too tightly packed. And so what you'll find in our time together is that we will use silence. We will use a pace that invites us to slow down and pay close attention. I have a colleague who reminds me from time to time, for us living here in Atlanta, we have a highway that circles the city called I-285. And while the speed limit is typically right around 60 or 70, you're typically going slow if you're doing the speed limit. And he reminds me that when he's on 285, there's not much he can see going 70 to 80 miles an hour. But when he moves into his neighborhood where the speed limit is about 40, 35 or 40 miles per hour, he's actually able to see more in the neighborhood that he lives in because he's slowed down and is able to kind of pay attention to the detail that's passing him by or that he's passing by. And so in a similar way, we don't want to be going 70 to 80 miles per hour in our time together. We want to be going more like 40 or 35 so that we can pay attention and notice what may be coming up for us in our shared reflection. So circles of trust, again, involves these principles, these practices, and these key concepts that are all kind of fit together in a way of creating shared space and a collective experience. But the circles of trust approach, which is really crafted toward folks taking a kind of self-reflective journey around their leadership and their practice, we'll be using that in tandem with a couple of other practices that are designed to help to clarify your leadership challenges and leadership learning tasks, but also to do more than just allow us all a individual journey, but to begin to get at what collective wisdom and intelligence are we gathering and curating here in this gathering of leaders and disability rights. So for that, there are a couple of other complementary methodologies you want to lift up. And so in addition to circles of trust, we'll be working with what we call art of hosting practices. And art of hosting seeks to stimulate and make visible the collective knowledge and wisdom that operates in a room. Art of Hosting is a global community of practice and learning of facilitators all around the world who facilitate different types of learning and educational practices in groups that allow groups to gain access to collective intelligence, to the collective intelligence and wisdom of a community to address key issues. So one of the ways we talk about that is that in most rooms where we gather, especially where there's some level of expertise present among participants in the room, one of the underlying questions typically is, who's the expert and who is the smartest person in the room? Well, what Art of Hosting does is it says we're going to have conversations that matter, but what matters most is not who's the smartest person in the room, because in truth, the room itself is the smartest. And we need processes and practices that give us access to the knowledge and the knowledge that emerges in the shared work and experience that these collected experts have. And so we see you in that way and want to provide some opportunities for that, that knowledge to be curated, to be made visible. and to be offered back into the work we'll be taking back into our context of leadership and service. And so these practices, these participatory leadership practices that are together called Art of Hosting practices include things that some of you may have experienced, like World Cafe, Story Harvest, Open Space, and other kinds of practices. And they are based in a kind of theory of organizational and leadership development that a Canadian scholar named Jervis Bush talks about as dialogic organizational development, which he distinguishes from what he calls diagnostic organizational development. The assumption in which diagnostic organizational development is rooted is the idea that change occurs when the day-to-day thinking of community members has altered their day-to-day decisions and actions, right? Which leads to a change in the culture of the community that entrenches those new ways of thinking. So their thinking is changed when the language, the stories, and the narratives of the community that the community uses is altered in a profound way. There's one kind of famous quip in organizational theory that says culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So that no matter what kind of strategy you have, I don't care how well it's done and put together, that if the culture of an institution or organization or a movement does not support that strategy is ultimately doomed to fail. But dialogic organizational development works at the level of culture by helping to entrench new ways of thinking through the development of new language, new stories, and new narratives that a community, or organization, or institution uses to describe itself and to describe the reality in which it's working. And so that's the kind of the work that we'll be involved in when we're working with some of these dialogic practices. And I'll point those out when we get to the point at which we're talking about the arc of our week together. So that's Art of Hosting, and I invite any questions around that. The next practice we'll be using is leadership self-reflection ally groups. And so this will take place on Thursday, our next to last day together. Well, you'll be invited in groups of 4 to explore a key leadership challenge that you have and that you expect to face when you return home. And it'll be an opportunity for you to use some of these principles and practices that we've used during the course of the week to support your colleagues in their self-reflection. Also to stimulate ideas about what they may do going forward, while it helps to clarify the challenge and the potential strategies that they may use to address these challenges. So I'll walk through quickly what those ally groups will consist of in terms of the process, which we'll share this again with you when we gather, but just to give you a sense of how this process will go. So you have 4 roles in these groups: a presenter, a note taker, a timekeeper, and a facilitator. And each one of those 4 people in a group will play each role during the course of the day on Friday, because there'll be 4 separate opportunities for that. And so in the first kind of move in the ally groups, for about 15 minutes, the presenter will describe their leadership challenge and will be given the gift of silence from the others to provide that person the opportunity to describe in detail the challenge that they're facing. In phase 2, those 3 group members get to practice asking the presenter the open and honest questions that then may provide some openings or new windows or vistas through which they may see that challenge. In phase 3, we begin to get into brainstorming. So the 3 members of the group will brainstorm and share ideas and reflections about what they heard from the presenter during phases 1 and 2. And we want to note here, again, in keeping with our key practices earlier, this is about brainstorming not telling folks what they ought to be doing, but brainstorming ideas and sharing reflections about what it is that they heard. And then finally, after hearing that brainstorming, the presenter, after both hearing the brainstorming and also sharing about their challenges and getting those out open, honest questions, the presenter then has an opportunity to share what now they understand about the situation that they're facing. So that's the general kind of arc of how the leadership or self-reflection groups go. So those are the three kind of practices we'll be using together in tandem. And before we move to talk about the arc of the week and the general schedule for our time together, I want to see if there are any questions that you have about anything that I've shared thus far with regard to circles of trust, art of hosting, or the ally groups.
So Matthew, this is Andy, and there is a question that's come in, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because it is a very thoughtful and complete idea. But essentially, the question is, sometimes the people who work in our field may have deeply held beliefs that if integrated into their life and work could be harmful to others. And the person's sort of wondering, how does Parker Palmer address this sort of dissonance and the imperative for some values to be more valuable than others in a social justice movement that might be aimed at combating prejudice?
That's a very, very good question. And that's a very good question. And I'll say that's a live conversation among facilitators within the Center for Courage and Renewal. One of the core practices or responsibilities, I should say, of facilitators is that as a facilitator, our role in a circle of trust is to hold fiercely to the issue of safety, right? So in a circle of trust, if we recognize that there's harm being done by someone in the circle, then it's our job as facilitators to recognize that and to intervene. Again, not to do fixing, but also but to say to someone who may be doing harm in a circle that this is the kind of thing that's not acceptable, and here's why, right? What's also important is that in a circle of trust experience is that the expression of one person does not mean the muting of another, right? And so sometimes we'll use a covenant or a touchstone that talks about authoring your own story, right? Where we invite everyone in the circle to own their own truth and to name it into the space. And in many cases, that means that folks who have divergent opinions about a particular thing end up speaking back from the perspective and the point of their own kind of foundation, their own truth. And in that, you have conflict at some points. And conflict can be one of those points of paradox that we talked about before. What should also be said is that there are some circumstances that a circle of trust is not appropriate for. Okay, I want to make that clear. That the circles of trust approach is important and useful for creating space for this kind of self-reflection and that sort of thing. But when you have a community situation or an organizational situation in which someone is articulating and kind of aggressively using power in a particular way that harms other people, then there's a different kind of intervention that's necessary. And a circles of trust approach is not necessarily well suited for a situation in which a different kind of intervention is needed to create a safe work environment that's conducive to diversity and those kinds of things. So that's a great, thoughtful question. It's a live question right now among Center for Courage and Renewal facilitators, because the more you have diverse voices and backgrounds in a room, the greater the capacity for worldviews and perspectives and traditions to bump up against one another. And so how do we hold conflict? How do we hold conflicting perspectives? And while recognizing and holding intact the dignity and humanity of all folks involved? Thank you for that question. Are there other questions? And did that adequately address what you were asking?
I think there's, as you sort of indicated, and I'm sort of following, this person has a sort of follow-up idea, and they're saying they're going to save it for sort of the week when we're together. I think there's some really thoughtful sorts of, as you said, it's a really live question, not just for facilitators of Courage and Renewal, but for all of us in a society that values diversity and inclusiveness, how we make space for different life experiences and worldviews. But as this person said, they'll be interested to continue the conversation around this as part of the Academy.
As will I. Thank you for that.
Any other questions really quickly? I'm not seeing anything else. Okay, I think we can keep moving forward. If you have other questions, I'll be monitoring the question box.
All right. Thank you, Andy. So let's talk about the week. And I wanted to give you just a general sense of how our days will go. This will be, what you see on the screen will be true of Tuesday and Wednesday. There'll be some variation on Monday and Friday of that week. And as you know, that Sunday will begin in the afternoon, so it doesn't apply in terms of this general schedule. But this kind of gives you a sense of the structure of our days as a kind of basic framework. So at 9 each day, Andy and Mark will be available in the meeting space to provide an opportunity for mindfulness practice, meditation, or some other mindfulness practice, and that's optional for folks who would like that. At 9:30, we'll invite you to begin gathering. There'll be coffee available. We'll be kind of mingling and getting ourselves into the space. At 9:45, we want to ask everyone to begin to gather in the meeting space so that we can get started promptly at 10 and make the best use of our time. So that if we are going to have a kind of spacious and reasonable pace that makes it possible for us to do the kind of slowing down and reflective work that we hope to do, then it's important for us to be on time, right? And so we'll have our opening circle there at 10 o'clock and begin our morning session. We'll take that 2-hour block in the morning, have 90 minutes for lunch, and begin our afternoon session at 1:30. So that from 1:30 to 4:30, we'll have a 3-hour block that will be followed by open space, which will be an opportunity for us to call the conversations that need to be had based on the kind of content that's coming up and the key issues that are up for us. And open space will be our opportunity to kind of have the conversations that need to be had, that may or may not have been scripted into the prescribed sessions or modules for each day. And then we'll have a closing circle that bookends the day at 5:30 for that half hour just before dinner at 6 o'clock. So that's generally how the arc of the week will go, again, with some variation on Monday and on Friday. So let's talk about from day to day what we'll be doing, and you'll see where those variations come in. So Sunday is arrival day, where we'll arrive and registration begins at 3 o'clock. And at 4 o'clock, we'll begin with an introduction to the Leadership Academy and start with our opening circle that evening. On Monday, we begin with Courage and Renewal Circle of Trust practice, beginning with an exploration of what we call our inner landmarks of leadership. Well, you'll be invited to kind of reflect on the ways in which you've been shaped and are being shaped as a leader, to really kind of ground the experience in the experience of the week in what it is that you come with in terms of your own experiences, perspectives, traditions, models that inform your leadership. Later that day, just before we visit the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, we'll have a guest speaker, Mark Johnson, who's the Director of Advocacy at the Shepherd Center and the founder of ADAPT. And then we'll visit the National Center for Civil and Human Rights here in Atlanta. So you'll get to see some of Atlanta, visit the National Center. We'll have a guided tour that focuses on the tradition of disability rights, justice, and within the larger kind of civil rights framework. And then we'll come back to the to our home base, to the law school, and we will reflect a bit on the experience that we've had and what we saw and the discussions that we had in the National Center. So that's the arc of Monday. On Tuesday, Sonia Tinsley Hook will be with us during the morning to work with us around our leadership strengths assessment, the VIA. And then in that afternoon, we'll build on the experience that we had on that Monday that has to do with our inner landmarks through an art of hosting practice called the Collective Story Harvest. Well, we'll be doing some storytelling, but also we'll be looking at some of the larger themes that are emerging among us. On Wednesday, Dan will lead us off in the morning with a collective impact presentation, followed by another art of hosting practice designed to kind of get us to dialogue with the content, right, called World Cafe. And then after lunch in the afternoon, we will be taking kind of an exploration through what it means to lead change in what we call complex living systems, or what some folks call the two-loop theory of change. And so that'll be an interactive exercise where we're really taking much of what we have heard in the morning and putting it in a framework that allows us to kind of locate ourselves within the larger work that we share. On Thursday, we move into the leadership self-reflection ally groups, which will take pretty much the whole day. Toward the end of the day, Andy Imperato, who's the executive director of the Association of University Centers of Disability, will be with us and we'll speak. And then we'll have our closing circle for this kind of courage and renewal portion of our time together. And on Friday, we'll begin to move our attention and set our plans for home, engage in some evaluation and figure out what our next steps will be. And that covers the course of the week. So as we are preparing for our time together, as far as next steps are concerned, we want to invite you to bring 3 things. And the first thing is what we're calling a leadership symbol. So for our opening session on Sunday night, we want to invite you to bring an object or an image that symbolizes the deeply held values that drive your work in disability rights, that inform your work as a leader in this work. And I'm sure there would be a story attached to it, but and we'll invite you to share that briefly. But we'll use that object or image or symbol that you bring to kind of help to co-create the space that we'll inhabit together over the course of the week. The second thing we want you to bring, and this is not so much a tangible thing, but something we want you to be thinking about leading up to the end of the month, and that is think about the leadership challenge that you're facing in your work. So over the next 2 weeks, identify the 1 to 2 leadership challenges that you're experiencing and that may be highest on your list right now. Come prepared to share and to reflect on that challenge. And what we're aware of is that sometimes, even in the course of our being together, something else may come up. But what we want you to do in advance of our time together is just to begin to reflect on what's up for you right now and bring that with you, prepared to share and to reflect. And then third, we want you to bring writing materials. We'll provide some journals for you, but some of you may have a trusty journal or some other kind of form of capturing your thoughts. And we want to make sure that, especially for those moments of personal reflection that you have, what you need to do the kind of reflection that we want to foster in this space. So we'll begin Sunday at 3 o'clock, the 25th. Opening session starts at 4 o'clock. So check in, you'll have an hour there from 3 to 4. And the location is in the lower level of the Georgia State University Law School building. It's Knowles Conference Center at 85 Park Place, Atlanta, Georgia, 30303. So that's the arc of the week. You got a sense of how our days will go, with the exception of Monday and Friday, Monday and Thursday, I should say. And you have a sense of what the next steps are with regard to what you need to bring and when we'll show up together. Are there any additional questions about the arc of our time together?
So I know you said this, but I do want to emphasize that we will be providing journals to folks. But again, as Matthew said, if there's if you have a personal journal or another format that you'd like to use, you're certainly encouraged to bring those along, as well as pens and other writing utensils, colored pencils, whatever will sort of spur on your creativity and self-reflection. Any other questions out there? Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, so I think we're at the point of closing up. Here's the sort of contact information if you think of questions afterwards. And I think we will be in contact with you over the next couple of weeks to get you set up and ready for your trip to Atlanta. We are really excited about the Academy and looking forward to meeting and spending time with all of you. Again, if you think of any questions or any supports or clarification you need, please feel free to contact us at the email address here or at the phone number. And we'll see you at the end of the month. Thanks. Less than 2 weeks.
See you soon. Thank you very much.